Hello everybody, and welcome to the first and what I hope is actually a really long series. I talked about this, I think, last week, and doing like creepypastas on this channel, but I mean a specific kind, because there are literally hundreds and thousands of creepy stories out there from these little campfire internet story tales, and I'd say probably roughly 2 to 3% of them are actually like good, decent, something like that. Anyway, not saying that, let's say if you're listening and you wrote one, not saying yours is bad. I'm just saying the vast majority of them out there are bad, and so far they've actually made a sect of them called like Creepypastas, where this is so bad, but yet it's still funny, and it's not exactly scary, and it's just kind of stuff like that. However, with that said, the kind that I particularly like are anything that has to do with like the lost episodes of TV shows, like the unaired or a slightly creepy version of one. And I mean, granted, there are some just really weird, creepy TV shows that happen, like specific episodes. One of which that comes to my mind is actually from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that has to deal with the gun. I think it was Carlton and Will are outside of a bank and they get held up at an ATM machine or something like that, and Carlton like freaks out and decides the best way to combat this is to have a gun, and of course Will got shot while they were at the ATM, and now he's freaking out on Carlton. You can't have guns are bad, and all that stuff. And it was kind of like a public service announcement, but I mean, the entire tone of that show is just, of that episode, not the show, the entire tone of that episode was just, what? And it just led itself to like a more creepy environment. And of course then there's like the Halloween episodes from like Family Matters with Urkel and the possessed little demon puppet of himself, which actually ended up being a demon or something like that. But yeah, so sometimes there are just creepy shows. But these are like the unaired, too creepy for TV ones that usually have to deal with something of how the producer had, not the producer, but the editor had like just some crazy mental breakdown and rushed this through production, so the quality is like half as good as it normally is, kind of a thing, or everybody doesn't sound like they're voiced by the same people or something like that. Anyway, but that's the lost episodes, and then you've got like the haunted games or the creepy games or the game that just doesn't seem quite right, even though you've played through it thousands of times, or maybe your friend Bootleg Buddy got it to you or something like that. But it's those kinds of things. And with that said, this being the first one in this go-around, if there are pictures or if there are video, or sometimes even if there's games to go with it and I can actually get my computer to cooperate with me, I will get those and try to do and show you kind of like what it was, or take the pictures and put them in there as like proof that these were things that happened in it. Yeah, so I mean, with that said, welcome to Invisible Nightmares. Hope you enjoy.
You see, I'm a simple college student living alone in an apartment. I was very enthusiastic about the release of Pokemon Heart Gold Soul Silver here in the States. I had purposely locked myself out of all media and internet aside for school purposes. That meant no 4chan, no Bulbapedia, no Reddit, nothing. As I was busy with the school year and being poor at the time, I wasn't able to buy Soul Silver on its launch date. After my school year ended, I ordered Soul Silver on Amazon. However, it would take a week for it to arrive. I decided that during that time, I would replay my old Crystal version for the Game Boy Color. However, I realized long ago my mom threw it away because I told her that the save battery had went dead, and I was very upset about it then. She also threw away my silver version, so all I have is my old Game Boy Color. Such as, I set out to GameStop to buy a used silver version, as it is the only Pokemon game left they had for the Game Boy Color. $10, it was fairly cheap. I went home and started it up for a nostalgia trip. However, that's where things started getting bizarre, and most likely the reason why you're here to hear this. The Game Freak logo started up as normal, but then it just froze there. I thought the cart was just errored or something, so I turned it off and then back on. The same thing happened again. I tried pressing A and start over and over and over, and then all of the buttons just mashing them down. Eventually, the logo vanished, and there was a black screen for about 5 seconds. Suddenly, rather than going to the usual menu screen, I was already in the game, in a previous save file, which was a bit odd, as I was expecting all these carts to have been wiped due to the poor battery. Either way, I wasn't complaining. I would have chosen continue, just to see what the previous guy had done anyways. First off, I checked his trainer information. His name was just blank. He didn't have much originality. I checked his profile, and apparently he had 999 hours and 99 seconds put into the game, with all 16 badges and 99,999 Pokédollars, with all 251 Pokemon on the Pokedex. Seeing as how he apparently had both Mew and Celebi logged also, I'm guessing he either used a Game Genie or was a really hardcore Pokemon player back then. I checked his Pokemon to see what kind of team he had. To my surprise, I saw only 5 unknowns and a 6th Pokemon named Hurry. I'm thinking this must have been some kind of cruel joke by the person who last played the game, but I decided to check the profile of those Pokemon anyway. As expected, they were all different letters of unknown, all at level 5. I was a bit shaky with my unknown alphabet at the time, but I identified out the word that spelled leave. As for the 6th Pokemon, it turned out to be a Cyndaquil. Mind you that this is before there were individualized Pokemon icons in the Pokemon screen. The Cyndaquil looked normal, but it too was only level 5 with a single HP left. There were only 2 attacks it knew, Leer and Flash. I didn't know why he had named him Hurry, but at the time I just disregarded it. The most eerie thing was, despite my volume being at maximum, none of the Pokemons had used their usual cries. It was just pure silence. Having enough of the team, I had closed it, and was parked at what appeared to be a room inside the Bellsprout Tower. However, for some reason, there were no NPCs, and even more eerie was that pillar in the middle didn't seem to move at all. It was just as if it was leaning on its side. There was no music, there was no exit or ladder, or at least I thought that there wasn't. I walked around for a few minutes, but couldn't seem to find a way out. This was certainly not a room I'd seen in the Bellsprout Tower before. I tried checking my items for an escape rope, but the bag was completely empty. There weren't any wild Pokemon either. Finally, I managed to find a ladder, which turned out to be behind the pillar. The screen turned completely black, and music finally started playing. I had a sudden chill as I recognized that melody. I'd heard to be the theme when you listened to the radio at Alph Ruins, where the Unknown were. I immediately realized that this wasn't a loading transition, but rather a dark room you'd need to illuminate with flash. Before I took care of that, though, I checked my Pokegear to change the radio to something more pleasant. But it turns out that I had no radio card, phone card, or even a time card. There was only the map card, in which Gold, who I will be calling my character from now on, was just walking in a midst of black. I remembered that Cyndaquil had Flash, so I turned off my Pokegear and made him use it. I didn't see any message saying Hurry had used Flash, or anything like that. The room just became lit, and I soon regretted it. The room was a blood-chilling red with a linear gray path headed south. The ladder I'd used to come up or down was not seen there either. I had no choice but to head south. The screen got darker about every 20 steps that I took, and I finally had made it to the end, at which a sign was. When I read the sign, it simply said, "Turn back now." Suddenly, there was a prompt on screen with a yes or no, like there was a question that was asked. I chose yes, and I do not know what it was asking. The screen went black again, making that ladder sound, and the unknown radio music stopped. In a few seconds, it was replaced with the not as creepy Pokeflute radio music. I was in another dark room. I held my breath and used Flash again. Suddenly it says, "Hurry has fainted," which was odd, since I recalled that there were no status condition like poison on him, but I clearly wasn't in a battle. I checked my Pokemon quickly, and suddenly he was no longer in my party. In fact, after a little bit of investigating, none of the old Pokemon were there. but instead replaced with all level 10 unknowns. I did the same thing before and spelled out the unknown. Then the team of my unknown spelled, he died. Either way, after that creepy change, the room was lit to reveal myself in a very small room of what appeared to be only 4 squares big. The walls of the room were gray bricks, as if I was inside of something that was hollowed out. Inside the room appeared to be a bunch of grays similar to the ones in Pokemon Red and Blue. I walked around the small room, pressed A a lot, and nothing happened. I'd already concluded that this was clearly a hacked game, and some sadistic person sold it to GameStop. However, my curiosity kept me going. I checked the trainer profile of Gold again, only to find out that the sprite of Gold was now missing his arms. He also seemed to appear less smug, but rather more sad and empty in a way that I don't know how to describe. For some reason, it also said now that he had 24 badges, which was clearly an impossibility. After a few minutes of aimless wandering, my character slowly spun and did the escape rope spinning animation, but instead of flying up off the screen, my character spun downward slowly, as if he was sinking. After that screen, the music stopped. After finally landing, the overworld sprite of Gold, his skin now colored differently. Instead of the usual red color that he dons, he appeared completely white, including his skin, as if it came straight off the colorless Game Boy games and placed into the colored background of a Game Boy Color. I checked his profile, and now he was as white as his overworld sprite. He had also lost his legs and appeared to have what seemed to be tears of blood streaming from his eyes. It also said that he had 32 badges, which now started to disturb me, as this change of numbers seemed to represent something important. I also checked my Pokemon, which at this time contained 5 new unknowns and a level 100 Celebi without a nickname. The unknowns this time were all level 15 and spelled out dying. I checked the Celebi profile. It was a shiny Celebi, except with only half of the sprite. 1 leg, 1 arm, 1 eye. It only had 1 attack. Perish Song. The area I was in itself was the Sprout Tower, with an immobile pillar as before, except everything was apparently red now. I walked north for what felt like forever. Eventually, I finally encountered some generic men and women NPC. They were all lined up on the sides, just facing the long slanting pillar in the middle. They were also all white, and nothing happened when I tried to speak to any of them. I kept going north until eventually the pillar finally appeared to be chopped off, with that transparent red in the middle of it. I went up to red, and without even pressing A, I was suddenly engaged in a battle. The music started again, and it sounded like the unknown radio, but played backwards. Gold's battle back sprite matched his front, with the bloody eyes and white skins, but lack of arms. While Red sprite was the same as it was in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, except transparent. The starting text simply stated, "Wants to battle," as if he had no name. Both of us only had 1 Pokemon, which is weird because I swore I had the 6 unknown as well. My shiny Celebi came out, and conveniently with a half sprite for its back sprite. The shiny noise and animation was also different. It sounds as though it was made by multiple screech attacks used consecutively. Red sent out what seemed to be a normal male Pikachu, except for the fact he was level 255, and his sprite seemed sad and had tears coming out of his eyes. Rather than the usual fight, item, Pokemon, and run menu, I was only given the option to use my attacks. Since Celebi only had the 1, I chose it. Naturally, since Pikachu was level 255, he went first. Pikachu used Curse, which lowered his speed and increased his other stats. I'm not even for sure if Pikachu can learn Curse. Celebi used Perish Song. In 3 turns, both Pokemon will get KO'd, and it's not like I had any choice. At this point, I didn't even get to go back to the fight menu. The battle just continued on without me. I also noted that there were no animations during this entire sequence for some reason. Pikachu used Flail, which didn't do as much damage as I thought, despite his level and health were maxed out. Celebi used Perish Song, but nothing happened since he had already used it. Pikachu used Frustration, which did an absolute ton of damage, knocking Celebi down to less than 10 HP. Celebi used Plane Spit, which surprised me because Celebi didn't even have that attack in the first place. Now Celebi and Pikachu both had about 150 HP. Pikachu used Mean Look, and it really didn't do anything. As expected, due to the effects of Perish Song, my Celebi fainted, except in the text it said, Celebi has died. Instead of the ordinary drop-off screen animation, the Celebi backsprite just vanished. And for some odd reason, the Pikachu was still up, even with Perish Song, and it didn't count as my loss. Pikachu used one more different attack, which went beyond his 4-attack limit. Pikachu used Destiny Bond. Afterwards, it said, Pikachu has died, with a slow fade-out animation. Apparently, I was the winner, as the transparent red sprite showed up and said, blank. At that point, I just freaked out, as the transparent red sprite was suddenly beheaded, leaving nothing but his transparent body. The battle ended at that point and faded out along with the music. I'm back in the overworld with another change to the gold sprite. Now he was transparent as Red's overworld sprite was. I quickly checked the profile, and this time the only thing that remained of him was his head, with transparent skin. The head was zoomed in a little bit, showing nothing but blackness in his eyes. It also stated that he now had 40 badges. I backed out and checked my Pokemon. These were all level 20 shiny unknowns, which spelled out the words, no more. I was at what I now know was next to the inn. There was apparently no music playing, but for some reason, I still felt like something was there that could be heard. I was back in my room in Newbark Town. Maybe finally I'd get to play this game properly, but who was I kidding? I knew that sadistic person must have done something. I walked around the room and interacted with things as I was a bit afraid to go back downstairs to see what was waiting for me. I noticed while I was walking that it was just the background that was moving. Gold was not moving his transparent limbs at all, just floating there like the ghost you see in Diamond and Pearl. As expected, the radio, computer, and television did not work, so I had no choice but to go back down the stairs. I ended up in the same lower level of my house. Everything appeared as normal, except Mom wasn't home. After failing to interact with anything in this room, I decided to go outside, and to my surprise, the door leading outside at the south didn't work. I instead just continued to walk straight into the void. I continued moving south to see what was going on. My house vanishes as I head further south into the void. It was creepy as when I entered it, the outline of gold turned white to contrast with the pitch blackness. Eventually I reached a white area and Gold Sprite turned black and was transparent still. I continued south without ever thinking about stopping. After a long trek, I finally encountered something. It was Gold's original sprite. I talked to it and he said, "Goodbye forever." And when that happened, it said, "used nightmare." Which, at that point, I wouldn't even deny being a possibility. Gold did another escape rope animation and spun slowly downward like he had before. I was put back into that small hollowed out room surrounded by graves from earlier. Or at least I say I was back there. There was no sprite I could see anymore, and when I tried walking around, nothing moved. There wasn't even a wall bumping noise. I checked my trainer profile and there was absolutely nothing of Gold Sprite left. It said I had 0 badges and all the pictures of the gym leaders from Johto were replaced with skulls. I checked my Pokemon, they were all level 25 unknowns. As expected, when I spelled out the phrase, it was revealed, "I'm dead." As soon as I went back to the overworld, the room I was supposedly in was covered with the same blocks as the walls. I then figured out exactly what that room was when the final text was revealed. R.I.P. The room was a big grave surrounded with other graves. Gold had already been dead. He died presumably a few years after defeating Red. He was a young trainer who, despite his efforts in collecting so many badges and attempting to become a Pokemon Master, was still unable to avoid the inevitable fate of death, and his efforts were eventually forgotten by the next generation. I was unable to escape from that text no matter what I pressed. I tried resetting the game, and the same thing happened, at which I finally decided to give up upon that horrible nightmare. After that experience, I will never look at the gimmick unknown Pokemon the same way again. They say that only the first generation have folk tales and legends, but the second generation has shown me how unpleasant the truth can be. I eventually enjoyed Soul Silver immensely, but I still can't unthink of what that rigged game had told me.